Okay, everyone. So today I will be discussing the relationship um, between Pope Francis's Laudato Si and urban environmentalism. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis's papal encyclical on climate change, the Pope explains that urban development has taken place at an unprecedented rate in the 20th and 21st century. Sadly, this development has often taken place at the expense of the poor and their mental, emotional, and physical well-being. In the wealthy suburbs of American cities, we often find well-designed communities with well-funded schools, access to grocery stores, and in many cases, well-planned and abundant green space. In urban areas, however, because of a lack of what Pope Francis terms integral development, poor communities have been neglected, segregated, and exploited by city planners and politicians, creating a number of issues for these communities. Through a case study of Nashville, Tennessee, I will look at how urban communities are being affected by rapid and discriminatory urban development. Specifically, I will focus on three key issues which discriminatory urban planning has created for Nashville's African American communities. I will first look at the stress it puts on public health, then I will look at the stress it puts on social bonds and communities, and finally, I will look at the impact of poor urban development on the spiritual well-being of poor communities living in cities. Furthermore, I will look at how two Nashville leaders are responding to these issues and empowering their communities materially and socially through urban gardening. Now, first, I would like to provide a brief historical background of Nashville's discriminatory city planning practices, which have historically segregated predominantly Black communities into poorly planned, low-income neighborhoods. Dr. David A. Paget is an associate professor of geography at Tennessee State University, one of Nashville's three historically Black universities. In this video, Dr. Paget provides a brief explanation of the history of Nashville's discriminatory planning practices.
Of course, in the 1950s and 60s, you had redlining and segregation, and African Americans were relegated to the inner city. In the 1968 Housing Rights Act was passed. First time you started to see African Americans moving to the inner ring suburbs, then we had something that was called white Blacks. White people, so Blacks coming in, saw that their housing values might go down, some of them were just straight racist. They left, and the amenities went with stores, quality school, everything went with the whites. So they moved farther out to the suburbs, even to the exurbs, leaving behind these inner ring suburbs that became dumping grounds for Section 8 apartment complexes.
Okay, so one of the greatest issues caused by de facto segregation is the prevalence of food deserts in predominantly Black communities. Food deserts are defined by Vanderbilt professor Dr. David Schlunt as geographic locations possessing three key attributes. First is the access to fresh, healthy foods. Second is a high concentration of poverty. And third is poor transportation in these communities. Food deserts are also often characterized by high concentrations of unhealthy food sources like fast food chains, creating devastating health problems such as obesity and diabetes in these communities. Shamefully, African Americans make up 85% of the population living in Nashville in these areas identified as food deserts. Dr. Paget, who we heard speaking earlier, is widely credited as the first person to map Nashville's food deserts, which you can see above. This information is tragic and troubling. However, there is some incredible work being done in Nashville to help change things for the better. In South Nashville, an area containing one of Nashville's three food deserts identified by Dr. Paget, one man is working to provide sustainable food sources to his community. In 2014, Rob Veggies Horton founded Trap Garden, located in South Nashville, in order to help communities in food deserts to gain access to fresh produce so that they can develop healthy eating habits. Trap Garden was born out of Rob Horton's frustration with living in food deserts, both in St. Louis, where he was born and raised, and Nashville, where he attended Tennessee State University. Having lacked access to healthy food for the majority of his life, Robert Horton had realized the effects that a chronic lack of fresh fruits and vegetables was having on his body, and he worked to make sure that people living in food deserts have access to healthy, nutritious foods. After receiving a degree in public health from Tennessee State University, Robert Horton became frustrated by the healthcare system's focus on prescription rather than prevention. Today, Trap Garden has grown from an urban garden into a health education nonprofit which serves to empower poor communities to take control of their food and their health. As Pope Francis explains in the above quote, the environmental crisis is also a health crisis, and the work of Rob Horton and Trap Garden is helping to improve health outcomes and empower communities in urban environments such as Nashville. Urban gardening is vitally important, not only for its ability to feed communities, but also for its ability to strengthen social bonds. Nell Pearl Frierson, pictured above, founded Brooklyn Heights Community Garden in 2009 out of what she says was a deep need for the community to get back to its roots of connection between our elders and our young people, to rebuild and reconstruct self-awareness, self-pride, and self-esteem, end quote. North Nashville, where the Brooklyn Heights Community Garden is located, has suffered from a history of segregation and inequality. Poverty and social unrest in North Nashville has caused gang violence, which has taken the lives of countless young people, including a young man in Miss Pearl's community, whose death inspired her to build a garden that would help to strengthen community bonds and help keep kids away from violence. Lack of what Pope Francis calls integral development in areas such as North Nashville have left communities in urban areas vulnerable to gang violence and social unrest, as Pope Francis explained in the above quote. In addition to the stress which poverty places on social bonds, the Pope explains that the rise of technology and social media have also contributed to the fracturing of our social fabric. Mending this social fabric requires a great deal of work and love, two things which Miss Pearl and her friends have lots of. Miss Pearl explains that she saw a need in her community for intergenerational collaboration. Quote, many of the residents in the Brooklyn Heights neighborhood are elderly and on fixed incomes. There are no grocery stores within a mile of the garden. Public transportation is inadequate for residents who don't have another form of mobility. Since she started her garden in 2009, Miss Pearl has continued to bring young people together around the needs of the poorest and most vulnerable in her community, helping to form lasting bonds which are empowering her community despite the social turmoil of the 21st century. As Pope Francis makes clear in Laudato Si, urban environments create physical and social suffering that cannot be understated. From the Christian perspective, urban development is also neglecting people's unalienable right to connect to God through nature. While these communities might not be coming at these issues from a religious perspective, there is important spiritual work that is being done in these communities. As we can see through the work of Miss Pearl, our relationship with our planet and our neighbors enriches our spirit in an irreplaceable way. In the introduction of Laudato Si, Pope Francis quotes St. Francis of Assisi, who writes, quote, through the greatness and beauty of creatures, one comes to know by analogy their maker. Thus, the right to a relationship with God through nature and others is part of the unique dignity with which Christian tradition believes all people are endowed. In nature and being in God's presence, we find a peace which cannot be found in structures of concrete and glass, and which is necessary for a joyful life. Furthermore, these communities are doing the vitally important work of increasing social awareness of the land, which is vital for the future of environmental preservation. We can no longer despair when people do not care about the environment. We first need to look at the unjust systems which are impeding their ability to develop these relationships. Refreshingly, these organizations are helping to establish a bond with the environment that will undoubtedly lead more people to action and increase humanity's consciousness about the sacred nature of our planet. As Wendell Berry writes, quote, nobody can discover the world for someone else. Only when we discover it for ourselves does it become common ground and a common bond, and we cease to be alone. So that was my presentation. I appreciate all of your attention, and I hope you have a nice day. Thank you so much.